Hey, Grace Church, Pastor Omar here, and I'm so excited to be bringing the Church at Home message from my own living room today. I hope that everybody had an amazing Christmas season, celebrating the birth of Jesus with friends and family. And now that Christmas is over, we get to look forward to celebrating a brand new year. And I know that for me, this is the time when I start to reflect back on this past year, and I start to think about the goals that I have for this upcoming year. And we know these as resolutions. And so far, I have 2 resolutions. My first resolution is to stop drinking so much soda. Any soda drinkers out there? There is nothing better than reaching into the cooler at House Church and grabbing a Coke and drinking it straight out of the can. But I drink way too much soda, and I know it's not good for me. So if you see me drinking a soda this year, please remind me that this is one of my resolutions. My second New Year's resolution is to use my gym membership pass more than the one time that I used it last year. Yeah, you heard that right. I paid for a gym membership and I only used it one time last year. It was the most expensive workout of my life. And maybe your resolutions are similar to mine, or you're working towards things like spending more time with your family, eating better, saving more money, or reading the Bible more. And we set these resolutions because we want to become better. We want our lives to improve because we see that there's a gap between who we are and who we want to be. We know that there's a better version of ourselves that we can be or that we should be working towards. But as we set to accomplish our resolutions, we find that they're short-lived. We start the Bible plan, all excited for the new year, and then by the time March or April hits, we give up. Or we start going to the gym in hopes that we're going to get healthy. But by the end of January, we're done. We don't go back. And it seems like we're setting the same resolutions over and over again and not seeing any results. So what is it that keeps us stuck? Why is it that we're not moving forward? And I believe the reason is because we're not focused on the right thing. We set New Year's resolutions that are self-centered rather than God-centered. And our intentions behind our actions are focused on how we can expand our own kingdom rather than God's kingdom. And maybe the reason that your life hasn't moved forward is because there's an area in your life that you're not trusting God with. Real change doesn't start when the clock strikes midnight on New Year's. It starts when Jesus speaks to us and we trust him enough to step out and obey him. And maybe this year, we don't need another resolution. What we need is a deeper faith in God. And so what is faith? We use that word all the time. We say things like, just have faith. My faith is strong right now. But what does it actually mean? One of the best definitions of faith is in the Bible in Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. The Greek word for assurance here is the word hypostasis, which means foundation or underlying reality. So according to this verse, faith is the ground and foundation that we stand on as Christ followers. I also like to think of faith as our spiritual eyes. Just like our physical eyes give us the ability to look at the world around us, faith gives us the confident assurance of the things that we can't see, like God's presence and heaven. So simply put, faith is confident, active trust in who God is and what he's promised. Now, let me be very clear about what faith is not. Faith is not manifesting. Manifesting is one of those buzzwords that we hear all the time from people we know or social media. And it's this belief that you can think or believe something into existence. And honestly, I tried to manifest a Ferrari into existence once, and the closest that I got was the picture you saw on the screen. It's not faith. Real faith is being able to say to Jesus, I trust you completely because you're worthy and I know that you love me. And so today I want to look at one of the most famous stories in the Bible and one of the greatest examples of faith. And I believe if we apply what we learn from this story, it can transform our lives. And it's the story of Peter walking on water that we see in Matthew chapter 14. And so I want to set some context really quick. Jesus just fed 5,000 people, and it's one of the greatest miracles that he's ever done. And honestly, I have enough trouble trying to feed 6 people every night. So I think this is just amazing. And after this miracle, he tells the disciples to get into a boat and to sail across the Sea of Galilee to the other side. And he says he's going to meet them there after he sent the people away. And of course, Jesus being Jesus, he goes off to pray and spend time with God the Father before he meets them. And as the disciples are sailing across to the other side, they get caught in a storm. And this is where we pick up our story in Matthew chapter 14, 25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And this is so like Jesus. Rather than going and finding another boat like us mere mortals, he decides to walk on the sea towards the disciples. It's mind-blowing. I know that when I get to heaven, I definitely want to see the instant replay of that. And so as we continue our story, it says this: when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. And the disciples at first glance were absolutely terrified. And honestly, I would have been terrified too. They had never seen anything like this. Put yourself in their shoes and imagine what it must have been like to see someone walking towards you in the water. But notice what Jesus does first. He doesn't start by calming the storm. He starts by calming them. He says, take courage. It's me. Don't be afraid. And we learn an important lesson here. Courage doesn't come from our circumstances being calmed or removed. It comes from the presence of Christ himself. Jesus may not instantly remove the storms that we find ourselves in, but he wants us to know that he's always with us in the storm. And so as we keep reading in the story, listen to what Peter says. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. And I don't know if you've ever watched the Chosen TV show, but they do such a good job of depicting the disciples' different personalities. And if you know Peter, this is so typical of him. Of course, out of all the disciples, he would have been the one to say something crazy like this. And Peter is showing so much faith here. He trusted Jesus so much that he was willing to try something impossible and walk on water. And notice, he says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Peter doesn't just jump out of the boat on his own. He doesn't hype himself up and say, okay, I got this. He asked Jesus first. And that's because Peter knew that walking on water wasn't something that he could do on his own with just confidence and positive thinking. Peter knew that the impossible is only possible with Jesus. And then Jesus says one word. He says, come. And honestly, I can't believe that Jesus actually agrees to this. I would think that Jesus would say something more along the lines of, no, Peter, it's too dangerous. You're going to get hurt. But instead, he says, come. And at that moment, Peter had a choice. He could have stayed in the boat where it's safe or step out of the boat where it's scary and unknown. And Peter chooses to trust Jesus and put his confidence not on himself, but in the Lord. And then Peter gets out of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. And that's crazy. Like, imagine walking on waves. And that's what faith looks like. Hearing Jesus call you and getting out of the boat. And when we choose to step out of the boat, we experience God in a way that we can't experience from the sidelines. For Peter, the boat was familiar. It was predictable, the place where he had something to hold on to. But instead, Peter stepped out in faith and overcame the fear that was trying to keep him in the boat. And God is calling us out of the boat just like Peter. But many of us aren't willing to step out. We aren't willing to say yes to Jesus. We have all these different boats. Everyone has these different boats that we're trying to get out of, that God is trying to call us out of. And for some, that boat may be comfort. Maybe you don't want to be stretched. You don't want to be inconvenienced. You want to avoid things that make you feel uncomfortable. For others, the boat is fear of failure. You don't want to try things because you're afraid of messing up. You want to stay in the boat, not because you don't love Jesus, but because you're terrified of failing. For others, the boat is addiction. It feels safe and familiar. And it's what you run to cope when things feel overwhelming, because it's the thing that you can control until it eventually controls you. And here's what all those boats have in common. They feel safe, but they keep us stuck. They keep you close enough to Jesus to watch him, but not close enough to truly depend on him. But Jesus, in his grace and love for us, keeps coming to us in the storm saying, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." And that's because Jesus knows that when we choose to step out of the boat, we experience the impossible. So let me ask you, what is your impossible? What's the thing that you're avoiding because it feels too big? What's the thing that God has been leading you towards, but it scares you? Maybe your impossible is forgiving someone who hurt you deeply. Maybe it's walking away from that addiction that you've been battling. Maybe it's staying married after experiencing betrayal. Maybe it's sharing faith with someone at work. Or maybe it's a calling that God has for you, but you don't feel like you're ready for it. And the moment you step out of the boat, you start to see what only God can do. And what looks impossible to you is totally possible with Jesus. The boat is where you stay the same, but the water is where faith comes alive. Let's continue reading the story. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." For a moment, Peter did the impossible. He was walking on water. But then something unexpected happened. We see in the story that Peter started to sink. And so what caused Peter to start sinking? It's because he took his eyes off of Jesus and started focusing on the storm. And I think we can all relate to Peter. We finally start obeying. We finally take that next step of faith. We finally say yes to Jesus. And as soon as we do, we start hearing the voice of criticism, opinions, doubt, and we start feeling exhausted. Or maybe we get overwhelmed because the thing that God called us into is bigger or it's harder than we ever imagined. And so we start second guessing, did God really tell me to do this? And before we know it, our focus shifts and we're not looking at Jesus anymore. We feel ourselves start to sink, not because Jesus moved, but because our focus did. And Peter's faith in Jesus was stripped away by the fear of his circumstances. We learn from Peter that when we step out of the boat, we must fix our eyes on Jesus. If you focus on the storm, you're going to start thinking things like, there's no way, I can't do this. God can't do this. But if we fix our eyes on Jesus, we're relying on the one who's bigger than the storm. And as we continue the story, it says this: immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. This is one of the most comforting parts of the whole story for me. Peter steps out, he does this amazing thing of walking on water, and then he starts to sink. And what does Jesus do? He doesn't stand there with his arms crossed and say, "Wow, really, Peter? You should know better. Go ahead and swim back." No, Jesus reaches out immediately. And that word immediately matters because Jesus doesn't hesitate. He doesn't pause to make a point. He doesn't wait for Peter to learn his lesson first. And some of us are scared that if we take that next step of faith and it doesn't go perfectly, Jesus is going to be disappointed, that he'll leave us out in the water alone. But immediately destroys that lie. And I think some of us have to hear that. In our weakest moment, God doesn't push us away and cancel his love for us. Jesus grabs us, pulls us up, and protects us. And this story shows us something so clearly. Risking failure for the sake of following Jesus is better than staying in the boat. Because the boat feels safe, but it keeps you from growing, from being fully dependent on Jesus. Peter's failure didn't end in drowning. It led him to develop a stronger faith and trust in Jesus. And yes, Jesus asks him, "Why did you doubt?" But that's not rejection. It's Jesus saying to Peter, "I'm teaching you how to trust me." And here's what I love. Peter learned something that the other disciples couldn't learn from staying inside the boat. He learned what it feels like to be held up by the power of Jesus. He saw what it feels like to cry out, "Lord, save me," and experience Jesus' rescue. So if you're hesitating to step out because you're afraid you might fail, I want you to remember, if Jesus is the one calling you, he's not sending you alone. And if your faith fails, or if you stumble, you are never outside of his reach. The hand of Jesus is right there, ready to catch you. Let's finish the story. Then those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Now, I don't want you to miss the ending, because the point isn't that Peter walked on water. The point is that everyone ended up worshiping Jesus. Their fear turned into worship. They all said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And the point of faith is not to walk on water. It's to lead us to worship God. The purpose of faith is to help us to see that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that he's the Son of God, and that he is all powerful and came to free us from our sin and give us new life, that he is in control of the storm. So as we step out into this new year, Jesus is saying, "Come." He's calling us to a new level of faith, a new step of obedience, a deeper trust in him. He's calling us to step out of the comfortable boat towards him. And the storm is going to rage. Fear and doubt is going to enter in. But Jesus is right in front of us and guiding every step of the way. Even if our faith fails, even if we stumble, we are never outside of his reach. His hand is there ready to immediately catch us and hold us up. So fix your eyes on him. Let this be the year that you say yes when he calls you out. Don't let this be another year where you're just watching Jesus from a distance. Let this be the year where your faith grows, your trust deepens, and your life becomes a living act of worship. God bless you guys.